Goedemiddag allemaal, welkom bij dit webinar over Statement of Work en andere visie op inhuur. Mijn naam is Jan Ruts, ik ben de hoofdredacteur van Zipconomy en samen met Werf en organiseren wij deze webinarweek. De zesde alweer 25 webinars over de wereld van recruitment en inhuur. En we gaan het zo meteen over Statement of Work hebben. En dit is wel een van de webinars waar ik zelf met meer dan gemiddelde interesse naar uitkijk. Want volgens mij is dat echt wel een andere manier om aan te kijken naar hoe je omgaat met externe. En we hebben Vincent van Hees hier in de studio, een uitgebreide expert die jullie daar van alles over gaat vertellen zo meteen. Nou, jullie weten, het is een uitgebreid programma deze week, 25 webinars. We krijgen zo meteen nog het dynamisch aankoopsysteem, misschien nog beter bekend als de marktplaatsen. Interessant voor met name organisaties die in de publieke sector werkzaam zijn en voor de leveranciers die daar via die marktplaatsen hun personeel willen aanbieden. Morgen staat in het teken van out-of-the-box recruitment. Echt een nieuwe, innovatieve ideeën over hoe je personeel kan recruteren. En dan ronden we vrijdag af met een programma waar we in de ochtend over Total Talent Acquisition stilstaan. 3 verschillende webinars waar eigenlijk de webinarweek bij elkaar komt. Als je het hebt over een integrale manier van en inhuur van externe en het recruteren van vast personeel. Net na de middag geef ik een webinar over de politieke situatie, de wet en regelgeving en alles wat in de Haagse vierkante kilometer afspeelt. En dan ronden we af, als dan de vrijdagmiddag, dan zitten we ondertussen met onze benen op tafel, denk ik, of jullie in ieder geval, met de Startup Corner, waarbij 3 nieuwe start-ups langskomen die allemaal even kort een pitch neerzetten. En daarmee geven we even een beeld van wat er allemaal aan nieuwigheden op ons af gaat komen. Veel natuurlijk in de techwereld en dat gaat wel zowel rond recruitment als rond inhuur. Nou, dat voor de rest van de week en voor webinars waar je misschien nog niet hebt ingeschreven en dat alsnog zin hebt om dat te doen. Dat kan nog steeds. Als je naar WerfN gaat, website of naar de website van Zipconomy, dan kan je daar alsnog registreren voor die webinars. Nou, laatste huishoudelijke mededeling. Als je vragen hebt over dit webinar, stel ze dan gerust. Er staat een chatbox op je pagina waar je nu op zit. Dan kan je je vragen stellen en dan ga ik ze of durende de presentatie of achteraf eventjes voorleggen hier. De presentatie zal zo meteen in het Engels zijn. Nou, als je wat makkelijker vindt om de vragen in het Nederlands te stellen, doe dat gerust. Dan probeer ik ze hier eventjes te vertalen en aan Paul voor te leggen. Goed, gaan we over naar Paul. Welcome. Switch to English. Now I gave you a wide introduction already. Nice to have you here. We met a couple of months ago here in Amsterdam at the Procurement. Maybe the same question for the audience here. Why is statement of work now a topic that people should know about?
Well, increasingly, statement of work is becoming considered as being a big part of the non-permanent workforce. Yeah. And over the years, it's often been sort of kept separate and treated as somewhat special. Now, when organisations are looking for a much more dynamic workforce, it becomes much more sensible really to look at how that workforce can be part of the overall contingent non-permanent equation.
Yeah, it is more than just another type of contract.
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
There's much more to it than that.
Okay, well, I give this to you and good luck.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, hello everybody, and it's great to be able to speak to everyone on this particular topic. It's a passion of mine, and hopefully as I go through it, you'll detect some of that passion. Before I start really into the main content, I want you to set the context for some of the angles I'm going to be coming from, because in my career, I really sat round the entire virtual table of everything to do with statement of work. I've been a procurer, I've been a client, I've been a service provider, I've reviewed projects for their success, and I've coached and consulted over a number of years to organisations who want to get best value. Now, what am I going to try and do in this session today? Well, there's 3 main things I'm going to try and achieve. The first is to give you some insights and some practical takeaways, but also maybe to tee up some questions and some feedback at the end. The more interactive we can make it, the better. And obviously one of the key things as we go through this is giving people a sense of how does this play out in practice, what difference does it make to you as individuals in the roles that you do. So if you look at this picture for a second, and immediately you may see that that middle line, the vertical line, is a different size. The one on the right is bigger than the one on the left. Or you may be looking at that and thinking, actually, those middle lines are exactly the same size. They just look different. And the reason why I'm showing you that is because this really does play into the interpretation of statement of work. I'm going to baseline what it is and what it isn't. But as an industry, we've been incredibly good over the years of creating new terms and new ways of expressing things which are otherwise the same. And statement of work is probably the latest iteration of that. But how do you view statement of work? So you may have, depending on your particular role in your organisation and approach to the market, a different perspective. You may think that it's a convenient workaround, as in an organisation has various rules which it deploys people, and people don't want to necessarily conform to those rules, therefore they're seeking a workaround, and that workaround could well be statement of work. You may be looking at it as an area that's very hard to influence given your particular role in the organisation. It's done somewhere else. You may think of it, and often people make this mistake, that it's all about fixed price projects. Well, actually, that's not necessarily true. You may think it's more expensive. People find a way of charging more or actually agreeing a higher level of fee rate for around these types of resources. You may think it's incredibly political. Often some of these types of projects have a very senior executive involvement, maybe very political, and just generally you may think it's a very confusing minefield. And I'm going to try and tackle each of those things as we go through. So let's start off with the real basics. Every organisation, no matter what its size, needs services in which to operate. And a company will buy all manner of different types of services depending on their size and what they're doing in the market. And you've got a list in those boxes there. The common denominator about many of those services is they are all delivered by people, and they're all really governed by some kind of statement or summary of work. So what is a statement of work? Well, very, very simply, it's a bit of paper. It's a document. It sets out the key parameters that someone is going to deliver service to their client for a particular price, within particular timescales, to a particular level of quality. Now, where does this term come from? Well, it's a project management term. It originated in a number of years ago, and just by osmosis and back to this idea that in the recruitment industry, terms tend to take on a life of their own, it's become a catch-all expression for a type of worker. But that's not the reality. The reality is that you don't buy a statement of work. You buy the services that are covered by that statement of work, an absolutely critical distinction to make. Because this covers a variety of different services, there will never be a single owner in the organisation for statement of work spend. And in parallel with that, when you have an organisation that maybe segregates different types of spend into procurement categories, you'll never find a single procurement owner for SOW spend. Again, these are critical points of reality to keep in mind. Now, a statement of work can be standalone, often if it's surrounding a one-off purchase or one-off project, but often when companies are re-engaged on a regular basis within an organisation, they tend to be formed as part of a three-pronged contract structure. You'll have some kind of master agreement at the top, which will set out the main parameters of the relationship. It could be appointing a service provider to deliver IT services of a particular type. It may cover insurances and indemnities and intellectual property, real kind of headline terms and conditions that organisations have to engage with each other on. Then the statement of work will set out the precise work. It'll be a project level summary, and as I've mentioned in the opening, it'll cover the key elements of what the supplier is going to do, when and why. And you've got a list there in that blue box of the elements of a typical statement of work document. And then lower beneath that, you'll have service levels. Now, you will equate some kind of target achievement in the actual statement of work, but you may, for the type of work you're procuring, want to take that to a lower level of detail. And that's typically how the contract structure fits together. Now, the market for statement of work-based support is hugely dynamic and ever-changing. And as I mentioned to Hugo in the introduction, the idea that statement of work is now becoming a much more critical part of the overall non-permanent workforce means that there are some very real challenges and opportunities that are emerging. If I take you through some of the challenges as they sit on that slide. First of all, that it's becoming a way that people want to work. The gig economy means that there's a much growing population of people who want to earn money from working in that gig economy, in that more self-generating area of the market. That means that the actual supply chain is accelerating and disrupting. So for example, when I was consulting, I'd work with an accountancy firm. Now typically an accountancy firm creates control around the financials and reports around the financials of their client. But the particular firm I was supporting wanted to extend that into providing recruitment services for their clients, creating support services that are way more extensive than just the typical finance support. And then organisations are typically wanting much more outcome-based models. Now let me try and give you a really simple example of this. If I have a gardener that comes around to my house and helps me maintain my garden, and I pay them to come round for 2 hours a month. Let's say I pay them €25 a month. At the end of those 2 hours, I pay them for the time they've spent in my garden. But I'm not actually going to get any real measure of output on that. Conversely, if I engage a gardener to come round and once a month mow my lawn, weed my flower beds, and maybe do some other elements of maintenance, I'm paying them on delivering the things that I'm specifying. That's a fundamental difference between paying for effort and paying for outcome. But it's not easy to track performance and track relative targets. Again, let me follow that analogy to the next level. I'm not a gardener. I'm not mad keen on gardening. My wife is. Now, if I set the performance targets for the gardener, it's going to be relative to what I know, my experience. But if my wife sets those performance targets, they'll be a lot more stringent because her baseline of what good looks like is very different to mine. So it's not that straightforward how you determine what should be those critical targets. And then let's look at it through the lens of category management. I mentioned earlier that some organisations have a very structured way of managing spend. Let's just say, in that analogy, that the gardener is also a painter and decorator, an electrician, could be even a car mechanic. They're an all-round handyman or handywoman. You're not going to have a clear way of defining the levels of service that that person does if you only buy their support through the channel of different types of service. You've got to have a lot more fluidity in how you bring those services into your organisation because the boundaries are not clear anymore. And then finally, and every organisation is facing legislative changes, you've got this situation where, particularly around disguised employment, companies are being far more restricted in the nature of the resources they can bring in. And statement work is often a way to manage around those restrictions, but in a productive and obviously a commercially effective way. But let me use my analogy to really bring that challenge to life. In the first instance, the gardener that I pay for 2 hours to come in, I give them a key to my back door. When they want a cup of tea, they come in and use my kettle. When it's lunchtime and they're finished, I make them a sandwich and I invite them into my kitchen to sit down with me to have that lunch. They use my tools. To all intents and purposes, I'm essentially almost a co-worker to that resource that's helping me out domestically. But the other side of the coin is they come in, they have to knock on my front door, they bring their own tools, they bring their own tea, they bring their own lunch, and when they're finished, they bill me and I pay them subsequently. In the former, I may give them cash as I walk out the door. These are the key differences people need to bear in mind between when you're buying for time and you're buying an outcome. And hopefully that analogy works to bring that to life. Now, why does...
Can I have one question? Because the slide before, a good analogy of you need some kind of knowledge to make a good contract, and you probably need a mix of knowledge. And how do you look into a long time discussion on, is this an HR topic or is this a procurement topic, or should business be in the lead if you look at it, making a good statement of work contract?
It's all about defining what you're trying to achieve. So it's all about defining the need of the work. And I'll get into it in a bit more detail in terms of the material. But if you get that bit wrong at the start, everything else is out of balance. That's why it's so important to step back and say, what are we trying to achieve? What's the best resources to bring in to achieve that? And then how is it best to actually contract for those resources? So those things follow in a logical sequence.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So what are the benefits in more effective SOW management? Well, I'm calling out 6 main benefits there. The first is that it makes budgets go further. Notice I'm talking about making budgets go further, not cutting budgets. I've never yet met in all of my career somebody who wants to take money out of their budget, but they certainly are quite happy to get more for less. That's the mindset that you have to root an SOW program in. Then, of course, it's about assuring project outcomes. And Hugo, you just asked me a question around, how do you make sure that you're contracting effectively? And it is all around making sure you know what outcomes you're looking to achieve. And there are good SOWs and there are poorly written SOWs. And I can say in my career, I've seen more poorly written ones than good written ones, case in point. I mentioned the market is changing all the time, and therefore you want to make sure you're always using the very best talent and expertise in the market. Often service providers are only as good as the last thing they do. And so also there's a movement of people. So if you take, for example, a consulting firm that has a very well respected practice led by 2 or 3 experts, they win a lot of work because those experts are driving the projects. Those experts leave and set up their own smaller boutique company. The consultancy firm they used to work for is no longer the strongest service provider in the market. The boutique they're set up may well be. Now, unless you are creating that fluidity in the type of service providers you use, you're not going to tap into that, especially if you're a type of company that will say, I'm only going to engage with big service providers, big brand service providers, because often you miss some of the specialist and more adaptable and agile companies that can give you just as much, if not more, value. Work planning, using the right resource for the right thing at the right time for a competitive price. And then thinking more internally, particularly if you've got a procurement function that is driving a lot of strategic type procurement activity. Looking at total spend, looking at different types of supplier opportunity rationalization, etc. How does a more effective SOW program support that? Often procurement people are very challenged with time, and it's a case of how do they deploy that time effectively. But if you have an effective way of managing the entirety of the spend, and you give the people with the need and the budget the opportunity to support themselves and get additional help when they need it, then you're going to cover all the bases and you're going to include a much better approach to strategic sourcing. And then finally, generally strengthening in-house capability. This should be about how organisations can be helped to help themselves. This is not more of an outsourcing play. It's something that I'll talk about on a very often basis if you're connecting with me personally. Now, all of those benefits play out to different stakeholder groups in different ways. If you're the engagement manager, you've got the need and the budget, right? You get a better bang for your buck. That's fundamentally what you're looking to achieve in the quickest and smoothest and simplest way possible. If you're a procurement function, how do you deliver maximum value to the business? By really ensuring that your company gets best value for money. In your executive leadership, how do you make sure you're the best customer in the market? That you're attracting the best resources, and therefore, from a competitive advantage point of view, you're working with the best people that can propel your business forward. If you're an HR and talent acquisition, it's about strategic workforce planning. Back to this idea of making sure you know what type of resource is right for particular needs and managing accordingly. And finally, there's a big stakeholder group that's often missed in this matrix, which is the actual service providers themselves. because how do they use this as a platform for future work? I mentioned they're only as good as the last project they do. Therefore, how can you help them? And by helping them either reduce the cost of sale, speed their route to productivity, those benefits could come back to you and make you that customer of choice. So this is very much a circular series of benefits. But buying services is different. It is different to buying raw materials for a production line. And there are three main reasons for that. First is that price and value mean different things to different people, depending on the role they play in the buying decision. I will spend a different amount of money on a car to somebody else. It'll be whatever I think a car is worth to me. Neither of us will be the wrong, but we'll each have a different perspective. And particularly when you are responsible for meeting key objectives and you need help to deliver it, then your view on what value looks like could be very, very different to someone who is trying to be an intermediator in the process. There's often this idea that you can go out to RFP for a statement of work and you could be really precise about what you want, when you want it, and a company can go back in and say this is how much it's going to cost and nothing is going to change. That's not reality. The reality is often projects emerge, needs emerge, expectations and assumptions will change when somebody starts working in your organisation, particularly about things like quality of data and availability of key stakeholders. And then finally, perhaps the most important, from my point of view, is this idea of relationships and trust. The critical relationship in any program is between whoever is delivering the service and whoever wants the service. And so it's so important that there is that chemistry test between those two parties. Let me give you an example. Just say I'm head of a customer complaint team and the complaints are going in the wrong direction. I'm looking for someone to come in and help me diagnose why, come up with a plan of action, and then help me take that corrective action. Now, if I'm brand new into my position, I want someone to come in and really explode all the problems that I've inherited and how I can be the saviour of those problems. But if I've been in charge of this unit for 3 years, that's the last thing I want, because I'm going to be exposed, because that problem has emerged on my watch. The work, exactly the same. So the terms of the SAW, exactly the same. The nature of how that work is done is different. And that's why there's a nuance in here, which is very hard to put into an RFP, but critical to the success or failure of those relationships and a project. So we've talked about what is a statement of work, why it's a challenge. Now let's turn our thoughts to what does good look like. So there are three main elements of a good SAW solution. The first is that it's designed totally around the work, not the worker. I talked earlier on about SAW being a much bigger part of the non-permanent workforce. I see many organisations that start off by saying, I'm spending too much on independent consultants or contractors, and actually they should be more contingent workers. Therefore, I want to come up with a way of changing that balance. And you say to him, okay, what do they do? I don't know. How do they do it? I don't know. How much value are you getting? I don't know. It's the wrong point to start from. It has to be, what are the types of work we want to get done? How can we get that work serviced? And then who is best to actually deliver that service? Then how do you contract with them? The second point is it has to be rooted in around value for the people who have got the need and the budget. They must want to engage in this process. It must help them make decisions. It must speed what they do, eliminate delays and challenges for them. If that does, why would they not participate? I talk to a lot of people who will say, the trouble is I can never persuade the stakeholders to be part of the program. Why? Because they think it's a straitjacket. Why? Because that's the way it's described. Let me give you an example. Many organisations will use the word rogue spend or maverick spend. Not a very positive word. If you're finding a service provider who actually delivers what you want, when you want it, and for you, delivers great value. You're not a rogue or a maverick for going outside some time of control. You're entrepreneurial. You believe that service provider is right for you. So you've got to embrace that in the program rather than try and stamp it out. And the third thing, and it does relate to that last point, is return on investment matters more than price. If I pay one price for something and get a 2-to-1 return, I might think that's good value. If I pay twice as much and get a 6-to-1 return, that's even better. But again, the mindset often is, how do we reduce our spend? How do we stop doing these things, rather than how can we use it to accelerate our organisational success? Now, some of you, when you're building a solution, will turn to an MSP provider, managed service provider, to help you. And many MSPs are bringing statement of work solutions into their portfolio. But everyone is going to be doing the same. Those 6 boxes on the screen is what you'll see on every website, in every white paper, in every presentation. We want to be different. And there are 3 key areas where we're trying to drive a very different approach to this challenge. The first is we want to have a consultancy mindset. And hopefully you'll have seen that through some of the material I've already talked about. Our centre of gravity is how we help the engagement managers to get what they need done. The second point is that we want to do the best change management job we can. It's a change management challenge more than a commercial challenge. People have to be brought with you, not done to. So a big part of our approach to designing a solution is how to make it stick, how to make it real, and yes, how to make it loved and cherished in the organisation. And the final thing, which is really the centre of gravity for my role, which is how do we help our clients become more competitive in their chosen markets by having a much more effective way to the way they deploy and use statement of work based service providers. Now, I've talked some of the key principles of this. Here takes that to one level down, because you may be watching this and thinking, well, okay, that sounds great, but tangibly, what are the sort of steps I need to take? So let's run through those quickly. The first is, and this is most important, define the types of work you want to buy. And how does that subdivide? So consultancy, for example, there are many, many different types of consultancy. Right? How many different types of consultancy will you need? And crucially, of those services, how much of them are really adding capability to your organisation? They're not things you can do, whereas they're adding capacity. They're bolstering expertise you already have. If you are bolstering expertise you already have, then that's much more of a traditional contingent type approach. But if you're bringing in new capability into your organisation, that's much more around statement of work, true statement of work services. The third thing is, there's always an issue around, are we clear what we want when we start? So some kind of gating approach, which could be called a triage, it could be called a decision tree, many ways of terming it, but it's around guiding the engagement managers about the right route to get the right service providers into the door based on what they want to achieve. Now, many organisations think, well, that sounds great, but we don't know what we want. Well, actually, every organisation does annual plans and budgets. They all have annual programs of work. You can be a bit smart in where you're going to need third-party support to help you. If you're going on a buying spree or an acquiring company, you're going to need professional advisors more than you did before. So there's some very simple kind of data points that you can take a trend from. Just give a sense of where you're going to need these types of expertise in the next 6, 12 months. Clearly, you need to make sure that everything is underpinned by a quality statement of work, well defined, well described, and really hooked into a degree of tracking and measurement that makes sense and is realistic. You need to identify some specific suppliers that you work with and you trust. They will become preferred suppliers. There's a whole raft of things that you could do to qualify and to rationalise what you might do. But the point here is you need to work with the people who are engaging the services. What degree of choice do they need from different types of provider? And that's what you're designing the preferred supply list around. It makes sense commercially to have some kind of rate card structure, But you want to encourage the idea of competition. Now, not everything needs to be competed, but where you do, you want to really make people really make the most of their bench that might exist, or the urgency by which the requirement may have, or the fact that they may have spare capacity they want to leverage. So competing is always good, providing it's not a race to the bottom. And then finally, it's about simplifying the process, making it lean and mean, and then reviewing projects once they've been completed. That's what I would call a good 10-point checklist to be working around. So in sum, SAW management is a balancing act. You can see from that graphic there, the need and the budget is the heavyweight. And really the engagement managers, HR and procurement and service providers have got to find a way of balancing the way they deliver to meet that need and the budget. So what does it mean? Programs have got to be enabling. They've got to be enabling rather than controlling. They must have outcome-orientated performance metrics. What are you going to get back rather than what you're putting in? Be very dynamic about how you're using the service providers that you have a choice around, and facilitate. Procurement and HR should be facilitators, not gatekeepers. So I started out by saying, how do you view SAW today? And on the back of what I've just been through, maybe you've changed your mind. So let's examine some of those things. Do you see it as a personal opportunity in your role? Can you add more value to your organisation? Do you see it as more of an effective engagement mechanism for some of the services that you need to bring into your organisation? Is it a route to value to create competitive advantage for your business? Is it going to have high impact on not just the success of the organisation, but also the stakeholders that you have to deal with on a daily basis? Hopefully you've seen that actually if you do it well, it's critical to success, and then hopefully you've seen it as an oasis rather than a minefield. So we're going to open up for questions in a second, but finally, I've skirted across the top of this. There's a lot more to it. If you'd like to know more, then I'm happy to invite you free to a breakfast masterclass I'm running on the 19th of March. 4 key areas I'll be focusing on. One is going into the buying landscape in more detail, in particular, what are the key challenges and requirements of the engagement of the stakeholders? Secondly, how do you start? What sort of maturity are you emerging from, and how do you collect the right data to make a start? How do you make sure that you are selling the benefits of this to your key stakeholders? These are 3 of the key things that we'll be working on during that masterclass. And if you're interested, please reach out to my colleagues and they'll be delighted to give you a space. So, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. We have a couple of interesting questions, but first I want to go back to one of your slides, and you say, put the work central and not the worker. On Friday, we have a couple of webinars on total talent acquisition, and one of the key things there is you have to look at the talent. Let's go back to your gardener. What if that gardener, which is the best in town, wants to work with you because of the great lunch you make him on daytime? You also have to look on his needs to why he wants to work for you.
For sure, but it's about the payment triggers. You can have a great relationship with your service provider, but really it's about what are you paying for. And if you're paying them because you like their company and you know they like, and you're giving them that sort of that soft landing, if you like, around their engagement, that's different to I'm not going to pay them on an outcome that they're actually going to be critically evaluated against. I mean, I've got a really good example. A friend of mine's painter and decorator. First time we used him, we were out of work and it rained, and he brought our washing in from the line. Now you could say, what is that? That's real added value. But
from the point of the view of the worker, what I meant is maybe he wants to work for you because you serve great lunch. Do you fit that into your statement of work, or your view on maybe put also the worker more central in case of the work? No,
you've got to be clear. You've got to take away that line. You've got to be absolutely clear that the SAW is around what they're going to be delivering.
A couple of questions. One is, do you see the use of more statement of work because of the IR35 in England, and there is new rules coming in Holland also for using freelancers. Is a statement of work an escape for that?
I wouldn't use the word escape or workaround. But what you often find is that the IR35 and the equivalent in the Netherlands will flush out the fact that people are being engaged on stretching requirements. They'll come in on a 3-month project, do very well. Whoever they're working with will say, I've got another bit of work for you. Before you know where they are, they've just been on this bit of elastic. So the opportunity around IR35 and equivalent is to say, how are we really engaging that talent? And actually, if you know you're going to re-engage somebody on a regular basis, then you create that in that 3-part structure. Create a master agreement that actually says you are qualified to do IT services. Yep. This is how I'm going to cool down your work. But you have to be clear, they can't exclusively work for you.
I say to the viewers, IR35 is the British rules on how to work with freelancers, a bit like the Wet DBA we have in Holland. And on Monday or Tuesday we have an article on Zip Economy on IR35. I think one question that relates to this one is, can a company calls an assignment a statement of work even if there are no deliverables and it's just hourly rate and period of time in a contract? Is that a statement of work?
It depends on at what point you're paying. So if I'm paying on the achievement of something, the fact that they may be billing me on an hourly basis, that is the mechanism by which they're getting paid. But I'm only going to pay them once they've actually delivered me something. And that's what is important in the
So that's key, pay at the end of the...
Or you break it down. I mean, that's why I said that a fixed price is often confused for equaling a statement of work. You can have time materials, you can have cap time materials, you can have all manner of different variants. The key point is what triggers payment. Is it time? Is it deliverable?
Yeah. Another question is, Paul, do you feel that the Dutch market is mature enough to adopt statement of work?
It's a hard one for me to answer because I'm relatively new to the Dutch market. However, the principles that I've talked through can be applicable to any market. Clearly the line in the sand is how are some of the definitions played through inside the Netherlands. But I also find that with this idea of maturity is an interesting one because you've got organisational maturity, as in we want to do something different and we need to do something different, versus individuals that are a bit nervous about doing something different because they're not quite sure how. So again, that maturity is from different angles.
Yeah. And it's, we see, there's another question, we see a trend in mixed deliverables. Labor and materials will deliver the desired result. Can you work with the outcome-based statement of work to accommodate that?
Yes, so you can have a statement of work that says I'm going to engage you on a monthly retainer, and then you have within that month you have very specific event-driven goals, so you get paid from 2 directions.
Yeah. And somebody asked, it's maybe a nice question for you also, could you elaborate on what the role of an MSP like Hays is in implementing the statement of work way of working?
Well, fundamentally we're a conduit between the people with the need and the budget and the external supply base. Typically, we know an MSP is set up around the contingent workforce, recruitment, supplying people around a timesheet. The processes are exactly the same. So instead of actually signing off a timesheet, you can sign off a service receipt for work done. So actually what you need to do is step back and say the MSP process, how does that apply? And if you've got the right adaptability of your process, then you can take on almost any non-permanent work. And that's how we're describing our MSP projects, everything non-permanent.
And is the technology ready for using this? Or we have the vendor management systems, which is sometimes getting more talent-based. This is the other angle. Are the vendor management systems ready for statements of work?
Absolutely. I mean, the VMS platforms generally are ready for statement of work, and they've been ready for a long time. But the question is, what internal workflow do you want to use that technology for? And what often happens is you let the technology drive the design of your process. Whereas what we're trying to do is, now let's step back, and how do you want to work? especially your engagement managers, and then you make sure you configure the technology accordingly. Yeah. But absolutely, technology is there to do and support us.
Okay. Can I have the clicker, because we have we are at the end of the time of this presentation. Very interesting point of view, and your slides will be transferred to people that are on this webinar. I had a couple of questions of that. And if you do want to know more, well, this is on this slide your breakfast masterclass. Certainly some people will sign up voor dat. Oké, dank je voor dat. Dank je wel jullie kijkers voor deze interessante webinar over Statement of Work. En ik denk echt dat dat wel een trend zal zijn die we in de komende jaren ook in Nederland meer terug zullen zien. Al was het maar om ook in aanloop naar nieuwe wetgeving en een nieuwe visie op hoe je nou met zelfstandig om kan gaan. Daar natuurlijk toch wel degelijk bij kan helpen. Dat is goed uitgelegd. Maar het vraagt echt wel onder andere kijken en om andere manier van aanpak rond je inhuren daarvoor. Goed, dat was het voor dit webinar. Zoals ik in het begin nog zei, we krijgen er zo meteen nog eentje over de dynamische aankoopsystemen. En dan hebben we morgen Out of the Box Recruitment, 5 webinars daarover. En dan nodig ik jullie ook van harte uit om aanstaande vrijdag er weer aanwezig te zijn. Omdat we dan over Total Talent Acquisition gaan hebben met 3 verschillende webinars. En een webinar over politiek en de laatste over de start-ups. Nou, inschrijven kan nog steeds. Webinars kan je vinden op Werven en op Zipconomy natuurlijk. Nou, wie weet tot een van de volgende webinars.